Well, hi everyone. This is day 9 out of 30, my video challenge to myself, one video per day. And my goal is just to do it on one take, and whatever comes out, it comes out. So what I want to talk about, this is a multi-part series on overcoming fear of failure. And I've been reading this book by John Maxwell called Failing Forward. And in the second chapter of this book, he talks about getting a new definition of failure and success. So I don't know about you, but if you've ever failed a test and you feel like that's a failure, that's a one-time event, and it's bad. But you don't have to look at it that way. The example he gave was a Major League Baseball player who on August 6, 1999, stepped up to home plate and made the 5,113th out of his professional career. That's a lot of outs, and those would be considered failures in baseball. You failed to get a hit. Well, if he was to play, if he had 4 at-bats per game, that would be about over 1,000 games straight that he would have played and never gotten a hit. But that's not the way it worked out, because there were some hits in there, but there were a bunch of failures in between. So was this player discouraged for getting an out? No, because he knew that that's what happens in baseball. You get some outs and you get some hits. But as it turned out, that very game, he got his 3,000th hit of his career, which only 21 other people have ever done in the history of baseball. So I wouldn't consider that Tony Gwynn was a failure. He actually made the Hall of Fame. So how do we define failure? One of the greatest problems people have with failure is they are too quick to judge isolated situations in their lives and label them as failures. Instead, they need to keep the bigger picture in mind. Just like with Tony Gwynn, if he looked at every single time that he didn't get a hit as a failure, then he would probably have a lot of problems, a lot of negativity about that. But he knew that the big picture was that if he kept hitting, he would kept coming up to bat, he would eventually get hits and have success. So you need to look at it in the context of the bigger picture. That bigger perspective will allow you to have perseverance. And my profession as being a math tutor, I have lots of different students, but not every single tutoring session goes perfectly. Sometimes there's mistakes. Sometimes there's a problem with the internet connection. But I know long-term I'm there to help kids and to be successful. And so I can persevere. Let's talk about what failure is not. And he has several examples there. Number one is failure. People think failure is avoidable, but it's not. And why not? Because everybody fails. Everybody makes mistakes. Even 250 years ago, Alexander Pope wrote that line, "To err is human, to forgive divine." And he was just paraphrasing something that the Romans used 2,000 years ago. So making mistakes is just a human thing. It's not avoidable. Secondly, people think failure is an event. It's not an event. If you took a test and got an F, it doesn't mean that you failed. It just means that you didn't do well on that test because you didn't prepare properly. So just like success doesn't indicate an event, then failure does not an event either. Failure is just the price you pay on the way to success. Number 3, people think failure is objective. It's not. Well, let's say you missed a deadline at work, or you fumbled the ball in an important game. Your sense of failure is not determined by what other people think of you. It's what you think of you. So you're really the only person who can label what you do as a failure. Number 4, people think failure is the enemy, but it's not. When we give ourselves permission to fail, we at the same time will give ourselves permission to excel. People think failure is irreversible. It's not. There's an old saying in Texas, it doesn't matter how much milk you spill as long as you don't lose your cow. So let's not lose our cow. People think failure is a stigma. Stigma meaning you're kind of labeled with that because you made a mistake. But let's not do that. Let's not look at mistakes as stigmas, but look at them as steps toward success. And then the last one is that people think failure is final, but it's not, because you can keep going. So it's really all in the way you look at things. There's lots of examples of people who went through multiple failures before they were successful. For example, Truett Cathy, the founder of Chick-fil-A, went through numerous personal trials before he actually got to the point of being successful. Let's see, there was one last thing I wanted to say. Oh, this one I really like. I'm just kind of end on this. A man named Chuck Braun of Idea Connection Systems encourages his new employees to think differently about making mistakes. And he gives each one, or each student in the training class, a quota of 30 mistakes. They must make 30 mistakes during that training session. If they use up all 30, they get another 30. So as a result, his students are relaxed. They think of mistakes in a whole new light, and then they begin learning. Mistakes are how we learn. So I try to encourage my students that don't worry about making mistakes. Mistakes are part of the learning process. If you fear mistakes, then you're never going to try and you're never going to get to the learning goal that you have. So that's all I had for today on failing forward. I hope this came out okay. But if it didn't, I'm going to look at that as just a price I'm going to pay on the way to getting better next time. So in the next video, we'll talk about the next chapter, which is if you failed, are you a failure?